is a little slow right now. Okay, all right. I will just screen. I hope my screen is visible.
Yes.
Thank you. So we left up at the while loop yesterday. So we are only left with data types and functions in Python. And I've also included a couple of slides about list comprehension because there was a doubt regarding it yesterday. So we're going to cover that and then we'll dive into deep learning, introduction to deep learning. So for Python, I didn't ask you all to maybe maintain a notebook or something, but the deep learning part that we're going to cover is a little bit theoretical. So if you want to study along while I teach, you can take a pen and paper and trace the thing along with me so that it will be better for you. So that will be a little bit theoretical, so bear with me, but it's also interesting because once you learn the theoretical part, you will be able to implement it when you work on it on your own. So that should be fun. So let's begin with data types. I'll put this into slideshow. So yeah, like I covered yesterday, lists, dictionaries and strings are the main data types in Python. Tuples and sets are also there, but if you remember, there was this thing about both of them being unchangeable. Unchangeable means not a lot of operations can be done on it, cannot be added, cannot be removed, deleted, inserted, etc. So they're not really that useful to us compared to lists, dictionaries and strings. So we're going to focus on lists and dictionaries and the operations on lists and dictionaries, which is again similar for strings, since strings are nothing but an array of characters. So moving to the next slide. So basically what is a list? A list is a data type that stores multiple items in a single variable. How do we denote it? If you remember from yesterday, simple as this, square brackets, and you can declare whatever you want in it. Can be string as well, str list. So this one thing to remember is the square bracket thing, apple, orange. So you can even have strings like this in a list. So simple as that, really useful, multi-purpose, multiple items in a single variable. So that is being denoted here. Created using square brackets, really important because basically through the brackets itself we can differentiate between a set, a tuple and a list. Lists have square brackets, tuples have the round bracket, sets have the curly bracket. So that is how you can differentiate between the three data types in Python. So that's a good thing to remember. And so why do we use them? What makes them better than tuples and sets? They are ordered, good thing, changeable, and also allow duplicates. So like we had seen, sets did not allow duplicates, but lists allow duplicates. They are changeable, they are ordered. Changeable means you can perform different types of insertion, deletion, sorting, other operations on it. So these items are indexed. What do we mean by indexed? We saw this yesterday, that they are numbered, they have a positional value. So the first item of the index always has 0, second item has 1, etc. It goes on in a similar way. So this is an example of what a list looks like. So if you just type this in your editor or your IDE and just run it. So this list is being created in this one simple line. You don't need a loop or anything. And with this simple print command, you are printing the contents of the list. Now coming to the operations, when we say that lists are ordered, it means that they have a defined order or a definite order. Order will not change. So as you can see over here, apple, banana, cherry, this will be maintained throughout unless we decide to sort it, unless we decide to remove this, or unless we decide to insert something between the two. this original order will be retained at all times. So that is a property of a list. So if a new items have to be added to a list, they are usually placed at the end. So if without specifying the position you add something, it will always be added to the end. For example, I'm adding watermelon over here, right? Simple. Next, these are just the several functions that you can use on a list. You can use len to find the length. That is self-explanatory. 3 elements, 3 is returned. Next, if you want to add something, like I said, if you want to add a new item, you use the append function to add. This will automatically add it to the end, so the list will look something like this. 4 will be at the end. And then remove over here you are specifying the element to be removed, and as you can see in the output, it has been successfully removed. So just like this, there are several other functions and operations that we can do on the list. So we'll look at a couple of them. The lists are changeable. This I have already covered. So that means you can change, add, remove, etc. Index list can have items with the same value, so duplicates allowed, because index is always different, right? Next, len is used to find the length of the strings. They can hold any data type. I just showed you. You can either put strings, numbers, etc. All of them are acceptable in case of a list. So we'll be finding the answers to these couple of questions. How to access them, the elements in a list, how to change list elements, that means replace any element, add them, remove them, loop them, and sort them. So these are the basic ones. Again, it's the same for dictionaries, and you can do the same for strings as well. So I will explain once thoroughly, and then you can compare it with the other data types and try to apply it. So if we want to index a list, so this is index position 1, starting index, ending index, right? So this is a list apple, banana, cherry. Now this list is starting index is 1, ending index is 2, and we are giving blackcurrant and watermelon. So once we execute this, we'll be able to see what happens. So I'll show the entire execution after I'm done explaining the functions. Next, over here we are using the dot insert function. Dot insert, pretty self-explanatory. The position where we want to insert and the element that we want to insert. So insertion is happening over here. Append, we just saw append, adding to the end. So in the output, orange will be displayed at the end over here. Next, remove, we want to remove a certain element, so this element will be removed. Now pop and push are familiar concepts if you know stacks. We usually pop an element or push an element. Pop usually means to take out. To take out is kind of like remove only, same thing. But over here we supply the index, we don't supply the value. Like over here we have supplied banana, but we are not doing that. We're supplying the value 1 over here. So since this starts with 0, 1, 2, banana will be removed. Now if you want to delete the entire list, we use the del command with the 0 index, that okay, delete the whole thing. If you want to, for example, delete only a couple of elements, then you can provide the required indexes. Next, how to print a list? Simple. We are using a for loop which we studied yesterday. X is the control variable which is traversing and starts from 0, is traversing the given list, and we are doing print x. So the expected output is apple, banana, and cherry. That's how you loop through a list. Next, last we have sort. Sort will alphabetically sort this list since it's a string. So simple as that, nothing to do, just let me just put this as list name dot sort print the sorted list, and that's it. Yeah, you get a list that is being sorted alphabetically. So these were some of the functions of lists. Now moving on to dictionaries. So like I had mentioned earlier, they store value in a key value concept. So what is this key value? So if you take a look over here, what are we doing? We have a dictionary, let's call it dict. And again, thing to remember, they start with the curly brace, right? So over here we can have two related values like this. For example, we have taken the example of a car here. So if brand is the key, what is the value? Ford. This can be Audi, this can be, BMW, it can be anything. Then we have the model. I'm not really familiar with different car models, but yeah, Mustang, sedan, hatchback, it can be any of those. And year as in when it was made or when it was launched. Again, year can be a variable value. So this kind of works like a database. So if you're aware with database operations, or how SQL databases work, what do we have? The databases are nothing but rows and columns, right? So if you have a school database or a college database, it looks something like this: roll number, class, age, etc. And within that we have multiple entries, right? So that's the same concept over here, but we are using it in a dictionary. When calling it a dictionary, we only have one key, one value for each. So similarly, if we have multiple dictionaries, we can have a database looking like this. So if you imagine a database and then study dictionaries, or if you imagine a table with different rows and columns and then study dictionaries, it will be really, really easy to, match the concepts and work. So as you can see, there's brand, model, car. We can keep going on with new keys. It can be price, it can be owner, it can be color, etc. So that is why dictionaries are different than lists and actually also useful, because they are ordered, changeable, and does not allow duplicates. But this key value combination helps you to store a lot of different values in a very organized way. So another example of this could be, just to bring clarity to the concept, is that the online MCQ tests that we have lately. What happens in that? That can also be thought in a way of a dictionary. So for example, there's question number 1, question number 2, question number 3, and then the MCQ options are A, C, and B. So what does the user do? They program this dictionary with all the answers, and in the end, whatever answers you enter, your dictionary and the answer key dictionary are just simply, okay, answer dictionary are simply just compared. So the 1, 2, 3 keys will obviously be same in both the dictionaries, but the answers will be matched with the entered answers, and then similarly 4 will be automatically generated. So that is one application of dictionary that we see in everyday life. So same concept, we can add, change, remove, etc. It cannot have two items with the same key. If that happens, it will be overwritten. So key always has to be unique, just like primary keys are always unique in the case of a database. So how to access a dictionary? We can access the items by referring to its key name inside the square brackets. So just like if you want to just display this model, this is the syntax for accessing it. Next, how to find out all the keys of a dictionary. So for example, you want to know what all parameters are present, because this is just a small example. When you're working, there might be like 1,000 keys or 100 keys, and you want to know what kind of parameters are there. So simply using the keys function, the dictionary name and the keys function, it will give you the entire list. So next, how we can change. Update function also does the same thing. So for example, you want to replace this year with this new year. So simply you're just referencing the year key and changing the value. How to add items? Adding an item is done by using the new index, assigning a value to it. So you're simply just gonna add a new one. Like I said, you can keep adding multiple ones. How to delete? We can use the pop or delete function just like we did in the case of lists. How to copy a dictionary? Dot copy function. Python is really straightforward. They don't want you to worry too much. They don't want you to break your head over these small operations. So everything has a function. You just need to know them and to know when to apply them. So this was all about dictionaries. For strings, it's the similar operation. So I would expect you all to go through it, since strings are really basic and it's common to mostly all programming languages. So coming to functions in Python. So let's start with the main function. So in the first class that I had yesterday, you must have noticed I put up those memes where it said no main function, we don't need the main function in Python. But again, Python does have a main function. We just don't need to really use it all the time. We don't need to use it for small operations. We don't need to use it when we are doing scripting or automation. But when we are doing OOPS, Python also has OOPS concepts. What are OOPS? Those who are Java students, they must be aware of the OOPS concepts. It's basically encapsulation, the 5 OOPS concept: abstraction, inheritance, polymorphism, and something called dynamic binding. Right? So even Python has OOPS. So in those cases where we have multiple classes, in case of inheritance, for example, there is a parent class or a child class, or for example, for polymorphism, we want to do function overloading. So in those cases, we obviously need to have a main method. We also have the concept of constructors in Python. Again, the need for main method arises. So just like all other programming languages, Python main function is the starting point of any program. When the program is run, the interpreter runs the code sequentially. We saw this yesterday. Main function is executed only when it's run as a Python program. It will not run the main function. It is imported as a module. Module is nothing but a library or a package. So after defining the main functions, we use this kind of syntax to define it. So if name, this is another concept. We have not covered that yet in this event, but you can look this up. Just you can Google what does this statement exactly means. So it will help you to gain better clarity of what these symbols mean, these double underscores and etc. So it's a good way to learn. So you can look that up. So yeah, so we use the def keyword in cases of functions to define a function. So if we write def main, that means we are defining the function main, and functions are indicated with the open close brackets. So print hello from a function, and if we use this statement, if name equal to main, main is executed. This is a very simple example of a function. Obviously, functions can be of varied degree. Functions can also be about recursion. They could be recursive in nature. There could be a lot of different types of functions. There could be function overloading, function overriding. Again, those are advanced concepts that come under OOPS and other things. So since this is only a Python essentials session, we will be covering how to write a basic function, what is the return parameter, return statement, and the pass statement. So that's all for this session. But yes, if you're interested, maybe towards the end of the session, I can give you a list of concepts that you can follow and look up if you want to get better at Python. So in Python, a function is a group of related statements that perform a specific task. We are all aware of that. What does the function do? Functions help break our program into smaller and modular chunks. As our program grows larger and larger, functions make it more organized. Obviously, if you have to do the same repetitive task, or if you have to do the same job again and again, it is better to use a function instead of making loops again and again, because at the end your programs are just judged based on how fast they are and how much less memory they take, right? So it avoids repetition and makes the code reusable. Reusability of code is highly advocated and highly expected of good programmers. So a function is a block of code which only runs when it's called. So you always have to call a function. It won't automatically execute. We can pass data through it, which is known as the parameters of a function. And using the return statement, we return the value. That means whatever the output is derived from the function is returned to the main or returned to the user through the return statement. So again, this is how you call a function, and this is how you declare a function. Declaration pretty easy. We use the def keyword, we give it any name, and then we do our job inside that function. And if we want to call it, what do? We just do hi. And for example, if you're finding whether the number is prime or not, whether the number is even or not, your function will be having a parameter. So you pass a parameter simply. If you are watching a direct value, you just pass it directly. If you have a variable, you pass it like this. So the pass statement and return statement. Let's look at return statement first. The return statement is used to exit a function and go back to the place where it was called from, and it returns the value as well. So for example, if this is a function, absolute value, it should return the absolute value of the enter number. If it is greater than 0, return this, else return negative of the number, right? So यहाँ पे क्या होगा? The return will come. The computer understands, since return is also a keyword, it will execute the function and then it will come here. And then print absolute value 2. 2 is being passed to the function here. All this is happening with the number 2. 2 is greater than 0. Return 2, and hence the value 2 is returned as output. So that is how the flow of a function works. Next, pass statement. Function definitions cannot be empty, but if for some reason your function does not have any content, you can put the pass statement for not getting an error in the end. What does that mean? Simply put, for example, you're working on a big project or you're working on a big program that has multiple functions, and you have a function called IDK. IDK means I don't know, and you don't know what you're going to do with it yet, but you know it's needed, but you haven't decided what steps to add in it. So you can simply use the pass statement that there's no error, yet your function is a part of the whole module. This is just a developer tip that instead of always having to worry about finishing everything from start to beginning, you can also leave something halfway by using the pass keyword. Now coming to list comprehension. The doubt I hope everyone's clear with lists. Can I just get a hands up or something in the meeting? Lists are clear, right? So if lists are clear and the operations on lists are clear, I'll proceed with list comprehension. Okay. Okay, nice. All right. So I see around 40% of you are clear with this. I hope the remaining of you are also listening. Okay, it has gone up to 50%. Nice. Okay. Let's take a look at list comprehension. I hope the person who asked the doubt yesterday is here in the meeting. Just drop a yes or no in the WhatsApp chat. Whoever had asked the doubt yesterday? Yes. Okay, great. And yeah, regarding the PPT, I will send you the PPT, the study material, and whatever I have used in these 2 days after the meeting ends. So I'll be sending it in the group chat itself, so you can go through it. And even if you have doubts, you all have my contact details. You can get in touch with me on Sundays. So like I said, I had also mentored in another platform. So Sundays are usually my day when I clarify doubts and answer queries, or if someone gets stuck with projects and stuff, I try to help them out on Sundays. So you can take a day or two, go through the material. If at any point you feel you are not clear with whatever I have explained, or you want a better understanding of the concept, you can message me and we'll try to resolve that. Okay, so coming back to list comprehension. Okay, half our time is up, so I guess we're at a good pace. We'll be able to finish. So basically, we know what a list is. Now we will take a look at what is list comprehension. List comprehension, in a very simple words, is a way to shorten the syntax. That's it. That's all you do. You don't want to write big for loops and while loops and functions, etc. You want to make your job easier. You want to write less code. You want to write concise code. So those are interested, You can also look up ternary operator. Those who are absolutely new to programming, you can look up ternary operator. Ternary operator is kind of like list comprehension only. Over here you can perform an if else in one line. So it's pretty interesting. Less code, concise, saves your time. Also looks really fancy when you use, fancy lines of code when you're in a hackathon or something. So you can look up ternary operator as well. So coming back to list comprehension, like I said, shortened syntax, that's all. So shortened syntax on the context of what? On the context of you wanting to create a new list based on the values of an existing list. So what are the prerequisites to do list comprehension? You should have an existing list, and the second thing, you should have a parameter. What do I mean by parameter? Parameter simply means over here the parameter on which you will sort or filter or create the new list. That's all I mean by parameter over here. So these are the two things that you need. If you have these two things, you can start ahead with list comprehension. So I have a couple of examples here, and I'll show a couple of examples on my whiteboard as well. So based on a list of fruits, since we were doing fruits, I used a similar example. You want a new list containing only the fruits with the letter A in them. So if you remember, we had apple, we had banana, we also had orange, I believe, something like that. So we'll just take a look that without list comprehension, how much you would have had to write. So over here, as you can see, this is our list: apple, banana, cherry, kiwi, mango. Added a couple of new fruits over here. Now we have created a new list. So far so good. Now we want to find only the elements of the list fruits that has the letter A in it. So what are we doing? We are writing a for we are running it throughout the list. हम पूरे list से उसको traverse करा रहे हैं. Next, what are we doing? We are again writing an if, because the traversal is not enough to meet our condition. We need something that will satisfy our condition as well. So then again we are writing an if, that if the letter A is present in X. So what is X over here? X is the first element, which is apple. So it is checking, is A present in apple? If it is true, it is appended to the new list. If it is false, it is again going back to the next element of the next ELE of the loop. So we have not used an else over here, so this can also be an example of how we can just even use one if statement. So 0th position, apple is there, it got appended. First position, banana, A is there, it got appended. Cherry, second element, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now this does not contain an A. This goes to the false part. False part, हमने कुछ define नहीं किया है. We have not defined anything. So it goes on to the third iteration. Third iteration, kiwi. Again, false, does not contain an A. No else statement, skips this, goes to fourth iteration. Mango contains an A. So what will be the new list? How will it look like? So new list will look something like apple, banana, and mango. That's it. Kiwi and cherry are out since they do not contain A. So now to get this filtered value, as I specified before, what did we need? We needed a new list. We had a new list. We needed a parameter. What was our parameter here? That it should contain A, right? So we got it. But as you can see, we had to write one for loop, one if, and then we got to this result. So how can we do it in lesser number of steps? If not in one step, we have a predefined list, which is fruits. We have a new list, which is over here. And what are we doing over here? We have X. X is traversing in fruits using a for loop. and using an if, it is checking whether it's present in X or not. So list comprehension is nothing but compression of the coding statements. So this first element you can regard it as what your control variable. Then you are writing your for loop just like you do over here. You have written the same thing over here as well. And then you have written an if. So this will automatically make the system understand that, okay, this is our control variable. We have to traverse the control variable in the list. And again, if in the list this is present, we have to add it to this new list, print new list. This is all list comprehension is about. Compression of code, writing lesser code, writing cleaner code. So instead of using indentation over here for loop, if let's say you are solving the problem in only one line. That is the benefit of list comprehension. Similarly, we have dictionary comprehension as well. Okay, so that brings me to my end of the presentation. As you can see, I had listed out list compression and dictionary comprehension as good topics to study after this session. So you can also look up more about it. But just to make this comprehension a little more clearer, I have a couple of examples. Let's quickly take a look at that and then we'll start with deep learning. If anyone has any doubts in the meantime, feel free to let me know. Oh my god, what's happening? Okay. Is list comprehension clear so far? Can I get a response in the WhatsApp group? Yes, okay. Okay, great. Thank you. All right. So let's quickly take a look at these two examples that I have here, and then we can start with the deep learning part of our session. I guess yes, will be more clear with examples. Okay. All right. So this over here is basically I have listed out the syntax for you. So expression for item in item. So now again you have to understand list compression can also be of varied types. It can have multiple loops, it can have multiple conditions. But since you are learning it for the first time, stick to either for loop, either if, or both of them together, right? Don't go to the extreme complex stuff right away because that will kind of demotivate you that you're not getting how it's working. So start with the easy thing, start writing your own logic, so that will make the process really easy. So as you can see, this is just a mapping of how the syntax works. Expression for item in list, letter for letter in human. This is how the basic syntax is for the for loop. Now let's take a look at this example over here. This is kind of less complex than what we had just seen. So H letters, letter for letter in human, print H letters. So pretty simple, right? If letter is present in human or not. When we run the program, the output will be HUMAN. That's it. It's just traversing the loop and printing the elements. And list go to the list, it is sending 111 elements, 11 characters, and then we are printing the list. This is the most basic form of list comprehension. Now, if you want to do it with an if condition, what are we doing? We saw this in the app fruits example as well. So x for x in range is the number of 20. So 1 to 20, this is gonna run. So for every x, which is for every value of x if for example starts from 1, it will check whether it is divisible by 2 or not. If it is not divisible by 2, obviously it won't be appended to the list. So only the even numbers between 1 to 20, only even numbers between 1 to 20 will be given as output. So this is all about list comprehension. Like I said, if you have any doubts even after this, you can reach out to me personally as well and we can cover that. We have another 20-25 minutes left. So let's start with deep learning. Let's see how much we can cover. So like I had said in the beginning, it's kind of theoretical, so kind of bear with me. But it is interesting. It will seem interesting if you like math, if you like learning a new concept entirely on your own. It should be a good introduction to deep learning. That's what I've tried to make. I have shortened everything. I have made it as if I would teach myself. So I hope you find it useful. So in case if you guys want to have a pen and paper in hand and trace it along with me, that will be great. So since it's introduction to deep learning, we first have to know what does deep learning exactly mean, right? So deep learning is basically a part of machine learning. It is based on the concept of artificial neural networks with representation learning. So before we go into what is representation learning, we need to know what kind of learning happens in machine learning, right? So primarily there are three types of learning that happens in machine learning. One is supervised, one is semi-supervised, and one is unsupervised. Now what do these three terms mean in very, very simple language? Supervised learning is basically you doing your homework with your mom. Semi-supervised is you doing your homework while your mom is helping you and also cutting the vegetables for dinner. She is doing two tasks at once. So she is urging you to do some of it on your own and she is helping you for some of it. That is semi-supervised learning. And unsupervised learning is that maybe your mom has gone to a marriage function. You have to submit a homework tomorrow. So you're sitting down, taking matters into your own hand, and you're doing the entire homework on your own. That is unsupervised learning. So that is basically what these three terms also mean in machine learning. Supervised means completely under the supervision of the developer or the designer of the model. Semi-supervised means half of the input is from the machine, half of the input is from the designer. And unsupervised means we completely rely on the machine to make its own assumptions, make its own conclusions, give us its own output. There is, we just give it the raw data, we don't tell the machine model anything, it does everything on its own. That is what these three terms mean. So now if anyone ever asks you, do you know supervised learning, do you not know unsupervised learning, how are they two different? Remember this example all the time. So you'll never forget what these three terms actually mean. Now coming to representation learning, we saw what kind of learning is involved in machine learning. We have come to something called representation learning. What is that? It is a set of techniques that allow the system to automatically discover the representations needed for feature detection of raw data. So it is kind of related to unsupervised, is kind of what we just discussed about unsupervised learning, that as a user or a designer or a developer, we just give the algorithm or our model the raw data. The rest we leave it on the model to discover the patterns, discover the logic, discover the existing relations between the parameters on its own. We don't give it anything else. That is what it exactly means by representation learning. So representation learning along with neural networks makes up deep learning. So what we can say in a very simple language that most of the work in deep learning is done by the machine learning model or the linear model or the regression model or the neural network. That's the term we are going to use. Now since we have clarity on what does learning and representation learning mean, let's take a look at what does neural network means. So it can be either artificial neural network or normally neural network. So they are a computing system. Just like we have small chips, we have earlier we used to have phones, really old ones that had such a big SIM, and then the SIM became miniaturized, and then we started growing up and we got these memory chips for putting music and wallpapers and whatnot. It's kind of like that. It's a small unit. It's a very small computing system, which is vaguely inspired by the biological neural networks that contribute the animal brain. So just like our human body has a neural network. What is a neural network? It is made up of thousands of neurons in our body that basically decide how our body functions, how we're going to react to pain, how we're going to react to happiness, how we're going to react when we are angry, how is our hormonal system going to work. That is all decided by our neural system or our neural network. So inspired from that, they have come up with this concept of artificial neural networks which is nothing but a small computing system based on the concept of biological neural networks. So an ANN, or an artificial neural network, is basically a collection of units or nodes called artificial neurons. Each neuron individually performs only one computation. So every neuron or every tiny computer can only perform one single computation. That's important to remember. Now since it's only one, obviously we can only do linear computation with it. What do we mean by linear computation? Let's take a look. So the individual component is only one, which is the neuron. So we diagrammatically show it like this in case of deep learning. So x is our main value of the w is the weight. I'll explain these terms. W is the weight, b is the bias, this is the operation, which is the addition operation, and y is our output. So to put it in a formula, because we mathematicians and humans and computer scientists, we really love our formulas and we want to make sense out of everything. So for a linear unit, this is the formula. So now this formula might have seem familiar to a lot of you. This is the formula for the slope intercept of a line, right? B is the intercept, W is the slope. So this can obviously be mathematically used to plot graphs as well, which we'll see. So in this, like I said, X is the input. Input as in whatever data we give, whatever raw information we feed the model. Weight is the associated to the weight of the connections. So as you can see, if this is the input, it is making some sort of connection and there is some operation going on. Now input and weight and bias might seem really hefty terms right now, but it will make more sense when we dive into this a little bit more. So B is a special kind of weight. B is also a weight, but it is a special kind of weight, that is a bias. Bias means it does not have any input data. Bias is its own value on its own. Now Y is the ultimate output of the neuron, sums up all the values received. So we are giving it an input. The input has a weight. The input along with the bias couples up and gives us the output, which is Y. So single neuron models are always linear models, because like we saw, it can only do one computation at a time. So now what is a bias and what is meant by weight? So as you can see, a bias is the difference between the expected value and the parameters. What is the expected value? So whenever you set out to do any assumption, obviously in your mind there is an expected value and there is a true value. This you can try to relate with, doing physics lab when you are in 10th or 9th or 11th. Whenever we do an experiment, we are always told by our teachers that this is the expected value of the experiment, and then there is a value that you get after all your human errors and all your, maybe if you're doing something related to temperature, then the room temperature of that particular day, it changes with that. So bias is that value. It is the difference between the expected value of the estimator and the parameters. That is what you can think of bias to be. Now, where does bias come from? How does it influence the model? We will see in a while. Now coming to weight. Weight is nothing but the trainable and untrainable parameters of a model. So just like there is a bias created when we are working with a model, there will always be components or parameters that are trainable and untrainable. What do we mean by these two terms, trainable and untrainable? We mean that we can either train them or we cannot train them. So what are the ones which we cannot train? We cannot train the ones that are introduced by the model, that occur naturally while we are doing the computations, or something that comes out as a really surprising value in the end, right? Those are things that we haven't controlled, but through modification of the model, through predictions done by the model, those values come into play. So those have a contribution to whatever formula we use or whatever output we are trying to get. So that is why they are known as the weight. Weights vary for every model. I hope I could make that clear. So this is just a simple example of how we use that formula to find the predicted value. So we have a data set of 80 serials. The input is the sugars or the grams of sugar per serving. Output is calories per serving called calories. B, and 2.5 is assumed because bias and weight we are not getting from the model, we are just assuming for this problem. So using the given info, we can estimate the calorie count of the entire cereal box. So just like we had the model above, just like we saw. So if the sugar value is 5 and weight is 2.5 and we're taking this as 1, the bias base value is 1. Since we only want one output, we don't want multiple outputs. So we're going to take this as 1. So 1 into 90 addition should give us the calories, which is 102.5. So if you compare this with the formula, you will get the answer, which is Wx plus B. So Wx plus B. I hope it's clear so far. Does anyone have any doubts? Please let me know in the chat. Any doubts so far? Okay, Anmol says great example. Thank you, Anmol. I know this might seem a little abrupt to those who are not really familiar with deep learning and machine learning, but hey, that's the point of this amazing event organized by your team. You learn something new, you research more about it, you get to know more about it, and that is how you gain the confidence that okay, machine learning, deep learning, these are not really difficult subjects. About biases, okay, sure, I'll do that. Let us look at this example. All right, biases. Okay, no, we don't have biases later on. All right. See, basically, bias is, you know, how we say that, okay, the teacher is biased towards Rahul or the teacher is biased towards Anmol. That word biased basically just means they're partial towards them, right? So now, whenever we are working with ML models or deep learning models, obviously the predicted value has a better, what can I say, it has a better affinity to the perfect value or the true value, right? Just like any science experiment, we expect it to be as perfect as possible, as near to the real value as possible. For example, if you're calculating the value of g is universal value, we know that 9.8. So you'd want your experiment to be as close to 9.8 as possible, but the true value will always remain 9.8. It won't change to what you get. So that difference between the true value and the expected or expected value and the value that you get is a bias. It is a bias introduced by the model because the model is doing the work, right? You're just supplying the data. You're telling the bias that this is the data, this is what you have to do, these are the parameters. So the bias is basically you can call it as a commodity or a quantity, which is the difference between the expected value, which is the true value, which is what it should be ultimately, and then compared to that, the parameters that you are giving, maybe because of the randomization of weight, maybe because some of the untrainable parameters, the answer that you get or the output that you get changes completely entirely. So obviously there will be a difference between the true value. Bias is a constant if you are designing the model and it is completely supervised. But in case of semi-supervised or unsupervised, if you are letting the model decide, no, it is not a constant, it will change. But depending on your program or depending on the model that you're designing, the bias will vary. Every model will have a different bias, right? I hope I could make that clear. I have a couple of other examples, so in the end, if we have time, I'll cover that. I hope you guys don't mind me taking another 10 or 15 minutes. Anmol, is that fine if I extend for like 10 or 15 minutes?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. All right. Okay, so now, just now, I'll pick up a little bit of pace here and then we can also discuss more towards the end. So that's what that with that example we only saw one value or one model or one linear model, or you can say one computation. Now obviously in best case scenario on one computation is not enough. We need more inputs and we need faster results, right? So if we have multiple inputs, just like over there we only had one input, but over here we have three different inputs. Just like this you can have multiple ones as well. So every input data will have its own weight, and since we only want one output, one final output for the entire model, that's why we're gonna make the bias as one over here, because we don't want multiple results, we only want one final result, right? Multiple inputs will also work in the same concept, just like we saw the previous one. So the formula for calculating that will look something like this. Formula is same. Just if there are three values, three different inputs, three separate terms are added just like this. That is all about multiple inputs. Same concept, same formula, same. This is just the theoretical part. Okay, we will get to the part where, since this is just an intro session, you need to know about the theoretical concept behind it before you actually start making these models on your own. Right, so that was all about multiple inputs. So now multiple inputs, obviously you have to compute it using something, right? How will you do it? Pen and paper won't be enough all the time. So Python, we say Python is used for data science, it is used for machine learning. Why is that so? Because we have this open source library called Keras in Python, which supplies an interface for artificial neural networks, or ANN. We just saw what ANN are. We just saw what they are made up of at an atomic level. So this library called Keras gives us the whole environment to work with artificial neural networks. So this is just a small activity to try to make a linear unit in Keras. So how do you create a model? This is the command you use, keras.sequential, to create a neural network and a stack of layers. What is the stack of layers? We'll see next. So simple code. You just open your IDE and you type from TensorFlow. TensorFlow is the main library. We are importing this specific package or library called Keras, and we are importing layers. Layers, what are layers? We'll see next. So this is just the code to create one linear unit. That means only one neuron in the whole network. So the code for it is something like this. So over here, this is a function layers.dense. We are creating dense layers. Again, what are dense layers? We'll see in a bit. So this just you need to understand what are the parameters that we are passing. This is just the code to import it. And this is one model. We are taking it as a variable. You can call it a variable. And we are using keras.sequential command, and within it we are using the layers.dense command or the function to generate a neural network having one linear unit. So what does this term units over here means? This parameter units means what are the number of final outputs that we want, which is 1. In our case, we are taking it as 1. We don't want multiple outputs. Since we are giving only one neuron, we only want one output, which is specified over here. And input shape. What does input shape means? Input shape basically means dimension of the inputs. What do we mean by dimension? So if most of you are familiar with matrices in mathematics, I am sure this will be really easy to understand, because for example, 1 into 3 matrix looks like this. A 3 into 3 matrix, let me just erase that. A 3 into 3 matrix will look something like 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, right? And similarly, we can have different types of 2 into 2 matrices, etc., etc. So over here, we have just defined the dimension of the inputs. Yeah. So that is how you are declaring that, okay, we want the input to be in this dimension. So over here, as you can see, we are using a list. We are using a list because lists, like we studied in the previous 10 minutes, that they are really flexible. We can do a lot with them, and they can also handle really complex operations on it. So it will create a list basically with the dimension 3. So don't get really intimidated by this piece of code over here. I will be sending this across as well. So maybe when you're free, you can just try out what happens when you type these lines of code in your IDE and see what happens. Okay, so now we saw words like layers and dense layers. So let's see what they actually mean. So we will learn how we can build neural networks capable of learning the complex kind of relationships deep neural networks are famous for. So obviously, for academic purposes, we need to start from the lowest atomic level, which is a neuron. But if you look at the bigger picture, obviously there will not ever be only one neuron in a neural network or only one node in a neural network. There will obviously be several of them, right? So, but as we saw, we can get only one linear model at a time. But we don't just want one linear model, we want multiple linear models to work together. What do we do in that case? We use the concept of layers. Layers are nothing but multiple neural networks of linear model working together, right? So basically a multi-input linear model with their neurons is known as a layer, and when these multiple linear models together are put together, they form something known as the dense layer. Dense, just like the English word, it has the meaning that dense means a lot of them, really thick. So that is where the concept of layers come in. So basically the arrangement of multiple neurons is known as a layer, and then the collection of all these linear units of multiple neurons is known as a dense layer, right? Okay, so yeah, this is how it looks like, and as you can see, since it's a dense layer, it is giving us two outputs instead of one. So through a deep stack of layers, a neural network can transform its input more and more complex ways. So obviously, the more number of layers we have, the faster our network works, the faster our model works, and the more accurate our model is, and we get more and more computated values, which are maybe more accurate. And we also get multiple values, and more complex operations can be performed if we have a deep stack of layers. That is why we use the concept of layers over here. Okay. I guess my internet connection is hopefully fine. I hope whoever was able to join in again. Okay, so coming back to activation deep neural network. So we just saw what are layers, right? Now, just having separate layers or a stack of, oh my god, okay, having a stack of layers, just imagine this. I know this might not make a lot of sense, but yeah, if there are a stack of layers like this, right? So this we can call, this is just a diagrammatic representation, nothing scientific or anything. I'm just trying to make it easier to understand. So imagine this is a dense layer, okay, or yeah, this is a dense layer. It has multiple sublayers, right? So we are calling this a dense layer. Now they're just stacked over each other. They're not interacting with each other. Just think, if, for example, if these are dominoes. So if you throw one, they all should fall, right? But in this case, there is zero interaction between them. So what do we do in that case? We want these layers to interact. We want to get a better outcome. We want them to work in complex ways. But they are not interacting with each other because something is missing. There comes the concept of activation energy. Now, if there are physics students or those who have done science till 12th, I'm sure you are aware of the term activation energy, what it means. It basically, the amount of energy required for the atoms to escape from a threshold frequency, terms like that, right? So you can imagine activation energy to be something similar. So two dense layers with nothing in between is no better than one single dense layer. So now if they don't interact, right? If they're not doing anything, there's no point of having them. So we need something non-linear to make these dense layers move into the world of lines of plane. So if there's one dense layer, the second dense layer, third dense layer, they're all very linear. They're not really dynamic, they're not performing anything, they're not really of use to us. So then we do something, we introduce something non-linear. We kind of introduce some kind of catalyst to make them interact, and we introduce another parameter basically to link these layers. So yeah, that is where activation energy comes in. Without activation energy, neural networks can only learn linear relationships. So we don't want that. We want complex relationships to be there. We want a complex computation to happen. So in those cases, we will be introducing the concept of activation energy in it. So this is just a normal graph. I don't know if you can make sense of this or not. Basically, fitting a non-linear relationship. So as you can see, there's no consistency in the graph, right? It is a broken parabola, to say the least. But with the introduction of activation energy, we will be able to find a relationship between all these parameters or all these occurrences that are happening. So let's take a look at what activation function exactly means, and let's take a look at an example of activation function. So an activation function is a function that we apply to the layers of outputs. The most common one is the rectifier max. So rectifier functions are a type of activation function, and the most common one is max. What does this max do? So rectifier functions basically rectify the non-linear values. I guess, just a second. Yeah. A rectifier function basically rectifies the non-consistent values so that there is a trend between the given parameters or the given outputs. So over here, as you can see, the negative values are rectified to 0. This is just a graphical depiction of it. This does not work on any specific data set or anything. This is just a graphical description that, okay, since these negative values were not making sense, they were rectified to 0. So when we rectify the rectifier, when we attach the rectifier to a linear unit, right, we get a rectified linear unit or an ReLU. Again, this is a bit theoretical, you just have to keep up with me. So just a second, yeah. So for this reason, it is also commonly called the ReLU function. Applying an ReLU activation to a linear unit means the output becomes max 0 W into V, which we might draw into a diagram like this. So what is happening over here, this rectifier is applied to a linear unit. Linear unit we just saw, it looks something like this. But when we have multiple layers, it was giving us multiple outputs and multiple operations were happening, right? But there was no interaction between them. Now again the same thing is happening. We might as well even add another parameter over here and supply it over here and give it its own weight. Again it will do the same thing, but it will also introduce an interaction between them. The interaction is depicted by this part over here. This is the symbol for activation function. So yeah, that will eventually help us to give an output, and this max function basically has this parameter as 0. W is weight and V is bias, X is the input value. So it will give us the maximum probable value of the model that we are training. So what in just you can just think of activation function as something that provides interaction between, note of it somewhere here. Yeah. You can just say it's something that provides a link or interaction between several dense layers. So that is how we do it. Now how do we do it in a programming fashion? That is a little more complex, and we'll cover that not in this session. So a stack, like I said, the activation energy helps it to interact with each other. So this is a diagrammatic representation of that. Multiple outputs, multiple activation energies, making them interact with each other, and finally giving us a linear output, which is Y over here. Now how to do this in Python? You can look it up. And in case you have any questions or doubts, you can ask me. We are already a little over time, but let's see if we can finish this for today. So this is again another code snippet. So we had done till here without this activation energy part previously. So now this is with multiple inputs and activation energy as ReLU. Like I said, ReLU is the only a theoretical part. You can just go through it on your own as well. So over here it is just one parameter, but with this parameter you will be able to make all the hidden layers and all the visible layers in the output layer interact with each other. So you can Am I audible? I'm sorry, I got disconnected. Can someone?
Yeah, audible, just
Okay, all right. Uh, I'll just share my screen once again. I'll just keep my camera off for a bit because my internet is acting up. Yeah, so coming back to what I was saying, you can try this code snippet over here that is given. Those are completely new to Python. You should first install Python 3. Any version 3.6, 3.5, 3.8. 3.8 is the latest, and you should install any IDE. So if in case you don't know, there are a couple of IDEs. You can use either PyCharm, you can use VS Code, you can even use Atom, etc. So you can install any of those, or you can even use Google Colab. So install those, and then don't forget to install the libraries before starting working with Keras. Now coming to the last part, it's only, I'll take another 10 minutes or so. We'll be done in that, and I'll be sending this across to you as well. Yeah, so this is a pretty easy part. This is again a little theoretical, so just try to pay attention for the next 5 minutes. We'll be done in that. So this is something called stochastic gradient descent. So far we've seen what neurons are, what neural networks are. We work with predefined values of biases and weights. We defined it ourselves. We did not take any inputs from the model. The network does not know anything yet. We have not told the network anything. We have not specified any conditions for it. So now we will see how we can train the model. So in addition to training the network, we need two concepts, which is a loss function and an optimizer. So now what do these two terms mean? The loss function means the disparity, measures the disparity between the target value and the value the model predicts. So this measure is what we just saw, it is the bias, right? Just like we saw earlier, it gives the disparity or the difference between the target true value and the value the model predicts. So that is the job of the loss function to calculate this value. This value is known as the bias. So different problems have different loss functions. Like I said, different problems have different biases. For regression based problems, the mean absolute error, or MAE as it's called, is the common loss function. So we use this function called mean absolute error to find out the loss function, and the loss function then ultimately gives us this value, which is the disparity between the two. That is all about loss function. That was pretty simple. Now coming to the optimizer. So what we have done so far, we have described the problem we want the network to solve. Now we want to tell the network that this is how we want you to solve it. So that is where the optimizer comes in. In a way, we can say all deep learning algorithms belong to this class, which is stochastic gradient descent. So basically the job of the optimizer is to tell or communicate, just like we tell the compiler to compile the program, we press the run button and then the compiler starts. Optimizer is kind of same. Optimizer will be conveying our conditions or our set of rules to the model, that okay, the user wants you to perform this algorithm or this search or this prediction based on these standard rules. That is the job of the optimizer. So in a way we can say all the algorithms, we've covered that. So in each iteration, sample training data is called a mini batch. These are just technical terms that you should know. Okay, just a sec, yeah. So sample of training data, each iteration is called a mini batch, and the complete round, as in if you have for example 10 data sets, and if you train your model based on all 10 data sets, the whole thing will be known as an epoch. Individual thing is called a mini batch, whole thing is called the epoch. So these are the two things that are enough to know for now, and this is just the definition of what is the loss function and the optimizer. So I'll just quickly go over this simple example on Kaggle. Let me just, yeah, just a second, my internet is a little slow. Yeah, so over here we'll just take a look. Yeah, so I covered what is the optimizer, we saw what is the loss function. You can read through this whole thing, but it might confuse you a little bit. So that's why I shortened that out. So if you just look at this example over here, we have a data set of red wine quality, right? It contains the parameters of 1600 Portuguese red wines, quality, rating, blind tests, etc. So we have put the data prepared in a cell. So this is cleaned data, sorted data. So we don't have to read the whole thing, but basically this is clean data that we have. And there are obviously certain rows and columns. There is a shape or the number of inputs. So over here basically 11 columns mean 11 inputs. This is pretty self-explanatory. And we have chosen a 3-layer networks with over 1500 neurons depending on the number of entries we have. So as you can see, there are a lot of entries over here, and the total number of wines as suggested over here was 1600. So that is what we have done, and again there is this code over here that you can see. So we have imported the given libraries using keras.sequential. They are creating the neural network with the shape 11 columns, and then with multiple layers are formed. Deciding the architecture of a model should be a part of the process. So this is what we have covered so far. You decide what shape, what dimension you want your model to have, and then start simple, use the validation loss as your guide. So after defining the model, we bring in the optimizer and loss function, which I just explained why they are essential. We need them. So we MAE, like I told you, we use the MAE, and then there's another function called Adam. In case of optimizer, we use that. So now we're ready to start the training. We've told Keras to feed the optimizer 256 rows of the data, which is the batch size, and do it 10 times. So this 10 times will be the epoch, which I just explained. What does that mean? Now using the model.fit command or model.fit function, we are passing the values, we are giving the batch size, we are giving the epochs, that how many times it should run until we get the final value. As you can see over here, all the 10 rounds are listed, right? Often a better way to use the loss is to plot it. So usually whatever outputs we give, we make a decision based on what the plot looks like. So whatever values that we get, we usually plot it. So we are importing pandas over here. Pandas is again one of the libraries of Python. It gives you all the functions for computing things, data analysis, maybe basically operations to do on rows and columns. So we are creating something called a data frame over here. A data frame is nothing but a table with multiple rows and columns. And then using the plot function, we are plotting the loss. So as you can see, there is a loss level, and then at one point it becomes static. So when the loss curve becomes horizontal like that, it means that the model has learned all it can and there is no need to continue the epochs. So that is how you implement the concept of loss function. You know keras.sequential, how to create the architecture of your model, and also use the optimizer, and then finally plot the loss of the given problem. So using pandas, we are doing the plotting, and using keras, we create the model. So this was all about deep learning, intro to deep learning from my end. And we have covered a significant amount of things in these 2 days. So I hope I was able to make you understand. I know this session was a little boring because it was kind of theoretical, but I hope the simplified version of it helps. Now at least you are aware of what is deep learning, what are neural networks, what is the loss optimizer, what is the activation function, what is the loss function, etc. I hope you at least have a basic gist of deep learning now. Can I get a response in the chat? Or maybe you can just raise hands over here, whatever is easier. Excuse me. Okay, I see a couple of hands. Right, so now you do have a basic idea about Python. You have a basic idea about deep learning. And I'm sure your forthcoming sessions will cover more of it, so it will be more easier for you to grasp. Hypothesis function, yeah, it's kind of boring. Yeah, I know. Okay, this doubt about hypothesis function, what exactly do you want to know? That whether it's the same or whether hypothesis basically means, predicting something. So in a way you can say, how is it similar to a neuron? I don't think I kind of understand your question. Let me just. It is actually basically a relationship thing which predicts what the output should be. Hypothesis means that uh, we have a concept called hypothesis testing in machine learning, but it doesn't exactly. What are regression problems? For that, I have to go into a bit of math, to be honest. Just like we have linear regression in statistics, right? So we have multiple regression also, we have linear regression also. And then we use this concepts of algebra and linear regression in machine learning. So to be exact about what regression problems are, you can think of them as it's basically regression is nothing but the values that we get in a continuous form, right? When we are thinking of it in a statistical way. So just like we saw the last graph of the wine problem, there was a relation, right? It was gradually decreasing. So that kind of a graph is basically a regression line or a regression problem, you can say in a way. But to know what regression exactly is, you have to go to the stats side of machine learning and start learning that. So if you want, I can send a couple of links for that as well. That might help you out. Does anyone have any more questions? Okay, I'll quickly just render this and save this for you guys so that I can send it right away. Just allow me 2 more minutes. I'll be done and then we can wrap up. I just want to send these to you right away. And yeah, like I said, you have my contact details. So in case any of the material that I have covered, there is a doubt or question, or you think I can explain it to you better once again, don't hesitate to reach out to me. Okay, how about I send in the documents in a while? Will that be fine? One more?
Yeah,
Actually, my internet is a
definitely.
bit slow right now. All right.
Take your time, please.
Right. All right. Okay. So can I at least see a couple of you? I don't know. I've been teaching to a screen till now.
Yeah, guys. Can we switch on our cameras? Um,
No? Okay.
can we switch on our cameras, please?
See, now Anmol is asking really network issue. Oh, okay.
Uh,
No worries, no
that-
worries, no worries. All right, then I guess we should wrap up for today. And I'll send over the material right away by tonight. So you all can go through it. If there are any questions, doubts, or concerns, I am in that group till now. So you can reach out to me in my DM or you can ask it in the group as well. I will check it and I will definitely answer. I hope you all had a good session and thank you Anmol for inviting me. I had a really great time.
Thank you a lot. I mean, I had a really great, great hosting you, and
Hmm.
so much of information, so pretty notes you made. The whiteboard notes I never expected. So pretty. I mean, I'm really impressed. But yeah, it
Yeah,
was a terrific session. Keeping 40 students all through 1.5 hours is really a good job. I mean, and you
that,
should go into the teaching industry, uh, so
that's what
managed and so I, I just cannot say I'm so happy. I
thank you Anmol.
contacted
Thank you
you.
so much. I am really
Eh,
glad that you did.
uh,
Yeah,
so
then I
guys,
must be
yeah,
waiting for your dinner, so let's wind up for today. Thank you
yeah.
everyone once again.
Thank you, Jasleen. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good night everyone. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you
Thank,
so much.
thank you so much. Bye bye
Thank you.
everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Guys, for the next meet, we have it on 1st of May. So be ready for that. We'd be your mentor would be taking that session. So yep. All right, I'll end this meeting. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.